The legislature may not be sitting, but Maclean and I are here. It is another BC Poly Hot Stove. I'm Jordan Bateman, VP Comms for the Independent Contractors and Businesses Association, or as John Horgan calls us, ICBA! No, I don't know. Joined as always by...
I'm Maclean K. I'm the editor-in-chief of the Orca here in the legislature in Victoria. Before we talk about anything else, this is true. I haven't told Jordan this. I grabbed the first piece of white paper I could find to try and correct the yellow that many of you had been telling me about that I look like on the show. And the first piece of paper I found, this is true, BC Budget 2013.
Oof. That was a good
Revenue
budget.
forecasts, economic review and assessment. This is just the piece of paper sitting on top of the stack here. And we cleaned this place out. Anyway, gives you a little insight into what the press gallery looks like.
2013, I believe that was Falcon's final budget?
The
election
yes,
was the
that would have been the
fall.
one going into the election.
It was the spring, yeah. Falcon's final budget.
Yeah.
Yes, the late, great Kevin Falcon. No, just kidding. I saw him the other day. He's doing great. Really great. Like, anyone who thinks he's coming back to run in politics, I think you're crazy. He's...
he probably looks healthy, rested, and well-adjusted.
Yeah, exactly. His family's good. And his kids are growing. Like, yeah, so he's in no rush to come back. Anyways, there was big news out of the legislature in the last few moments of the session regarding the finance minister, another finance minister. Maclean, tell me about being in that press conference with Carole James as she announced her Parkinson's diagnosis.
Well, I mean, we knew the NDP were being very coy, and I don't mean that in a bad way. Usually when they have an announcement, they'll sort of tell you, yeah, you should come to this, you should not come to this. And they just were like, no, we know nothing. We're not saying anything. And when we walked into the back room of the library, they had all the curtains drawn. It was very somber. Staff and MLAs from all three parties were there. I've never seen it more crowded. And then, of course, the room was just, you could hear a pin drop as Finance Minister Carole James announced she'd been diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, and actually managed to get through preparing and delivering the budget, knowing this. And so, I mean, obviously, nothing but best wishes from absolutely everyone here in the legislature, and I think probably from across BC.
Yeah, did the BC Liberals have a hint of this? Because I noticed there were BC Liberal MLAs that were there. They just heard it was a big announcement, so they kind of stuck their head in and.
Yeah, I think that was the case. I'm not sure if, there might have been some, I don't know this, but if there was some sort of chatter in the halls where, they ask, what's going on? And I guess I'm just guessing them saying, you'll want to come to this one is kind of what I'm assuming. I don't know that. I was just sort of told by a couple staffers that, like, yes, I cannot tell you what it is, but yes, it's serious, and that you'll definitely want to come. And what I'm not doing is imitating the facial expression, which was very grave and serious. I mean, you could tell it was bad news. We just had no idea what kind of bad news.
Yeah, and you got to hand it to the finance minister. I mean, any finance minister, budget time is the single busiest time of their year. It is an incredible amount of work. Like, if you're running a business, think about how big your budget is and all the pressure you have. Now multiply that to be $55 billion and dealing with health and safety issues that, if you don't fund the healthcare system right, people will die. So you got to make sure everything is going okay. She gets the diagnosis, I believe, in late January. Mid-February, she's delivering the budget, and then, kind of gets through this first few weeks of the session, and then comes out with the news. John Horgan not there. Notable emotional wreck, John Horgan. He did tell Smitty on the weekend that he wasn't there because he didn't want to cry in public. Was that kind of like it's such a hard thing, right? Like Horgan and James are as tight a duo at Premier and Finance Minister as you've ever seen in this province.
Apparently best friends since high school. So, there's obviously a very real bond there. And one thing we haven't mentioned that is, I think, nowhere near as significant, but at least worth pointing out, is that Carole James is not running again. Right. This seat here, Carole James is my MLA here in Victoria Beacon Hill. I mean, this seat has been, and I don't mean this in any way other than, this has been a fortress for her and her party since she first ran here in, 1996? Does that sound right?
No. 01, they all got wiped out. So it must be 05.
You're right. 2005 is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
But yes, because she was leader before she ran anyway. So since 2005, a very long time, this has been very much a Carole James seat. And this is not the point right now. This is not what matters, but it does open up at least, at the very least, a nomination. And, who knows, maybe the Green Party are looking at this seat. But again, that is a year from now problem. and something we'll talk about in episodes to come. In the meantime, everyone hopes the finance minister gets and stays well.
Yes, absolutely. I do wonder, I know she's staying on as finance minister. I do wonder if over the summer, once you get away from the momentum of what's going on in the budget and legislature now, if over the summer maybe she rethinks that, but who knows, then that's totally up to her and her family.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
We just wish them the best in whatever place she calls and decides what's best for her and family. I think I can't imagine a single British Columbia quibbling with that. So
no, absolutely none, not one.
Yeah, so that is the thing. Now, that was sort of the end of the day on Thursday. Throughout Thursday, that was the day after Scott's Tots took over the legislature.
Yes.
Scott Fraser then had invited in these, in good faith, in that quiet way that Scott Fraser speaks, to come and talk to them, and then he was going to clue them in on the deal that he cut with the hereditary chiefs. A deal, by the way, which British Columbians still don't know. By the way, I just watched last week's rant. I went crazy on this. Anyways, but the day after was that Thursday was the fallout from that in QP, and Scott Fraser didn't apologize, but John Horgan certainly did to the Victoria Police.
Mm-hmm. He did indeed. And it's right. It's amazing how long ago that seems now. Just a week ago, this was all happening. Much has happened since. But, I mean, I think the full greater picture is starting to emerge. I was going to talk about this later, but one of the Wet'suwet'en former hereditary chief, I guess, Teresa Tate Day, was speaking to MPs in Ottawa yesterday saying, listen, this whole thing has been hijacked by literally 5 people.
No, not that. 5 guys.
5 guys. Five current hereditary chiefs who are all men, and have excluded not only the elected chiefs, but also, what she called matriarchs and just female voices in the community. The 2 hereditary chiefs who were removed because of their views on Coastal GasLink were, in fact, women. And so what has we talked about this a bit last week, where this started as all First Nations are opposed to this project narrative, and it has very sort of slowly evolved into sort of a more nuanced and complex understanding of what's going on here, and also at the very least an impression that not only is this not all First Nations, not only is this not all BC First Nations, it's certainly not even the entire Wet'suwet'en. It appears to be a faction of a faction.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Now, they've left the legislature.
Yes. My
prediction, I think they may come back when the MLAs come back.
They have said they will be back. Yeah. I will tell you this. We've both, speaking with the Speaker's Chief of Staff, Alan Mullen, and a few legislative security officers more off the record, is that they're done. Their patience is completely fried. The Speaker's office bent over backwards to accommodate and, chose not to interpret the injunction against barring an entrance the ceremonial entrance doesn't count. They chose to do that. It was a decision they made. The protesters kept breaking promises. They promised they wouldn't light a fire. They did. They promised they would, when they did light a fire, they promised they wouldn't move it underneath the steps so that people who had been complaining about smoke inhalation who work in those offices would be left alone. They didn't do that. They promised they wouldn't erect tents. There were 3 before the end. And the area of the protest just kept expanding and expanding and expanding until it took up the entire front lawn. And after they were invited in and then chose not to leave afterwards, I think the patience has completely and fully run out with legislative security, the Speaker's office, the Solicitor General, Mike Farnworth, and indeed sort of the entire legislature writ large. Is that it's kind of like that's no more.
Yeah. Well, they need to be careful if this group comes and reamasses somewhere on the legislative grounds. The university is about to get out. Increases the number of potentially woke protesters heading over there. They need to make sure that they have very firm rules in place as to what's appropriate and what's not. Now, of course, will they actually ever crack down and actually enforce those rules? That begs the question. But I understand there's now a fence across the ceremonial opening.
Yeah, I mean, it's a temporary fence, and it's I don't want to say strapped, but it's fixed so that you can't go up the ceremonial steps. I mean, one could hop over it. I don't think it's insurmountable.
Richard Zussman could. We know that.
Yes, yeah, in a single bound.
That's right.
But it is at least. I think it's more sort of statement than barrier, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So, my sense is that Fraser and the NDP are hoping that this deal, whatever it is they cut with the hereditary chiefs, helps kind of soothe the nerves.
Yeah.
But my sense is this is all going to flare up again in a week or two. The pipeline very clearly, John Horgan said it's going to be built. I don't care what that mob out there says. By the way, him using the term mob, very interesting. Up until then, they had been protesters exercising their democratic right, which is a pillar of democracy in NDP land.
Land defenders, Jordan.
Yes,
land defenders.
Yes, land defenders. Yes, the great Adam Sterling debunked that one time. That was hilarious. But anyways, they're going to come back. This is all going to flare up again. I feel like Battlestar Galactica, now available on Amazon Prime in Canada. All of this has happened before, and all of this will happen again.
It's true. The reason I brought up Chief Teresa Tate Day is I think that as the public has a better understanding of that this really is, I mean, as Dallas Smith wrote about in the Orca, this is an internal governance dispute that's happening in real time for the Wet'suwet'en. And so I think as more people understand that, there's going to be less and less and less sympathy for, people standing up saying they speak for all First Nations because of a faction within a faction as opposed to a project. It just looks a little more, I'm going to use the word silly, or at the very least, short-sighted.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's flared by social media. I wrote a piece for the Orca on some analysis done on a public comment period for a flotel. That's a floating hotel that was proposed as a work camp for wood fiber LNG. Frankly, in the grand scheme of environmental issues around an LNG plant, a flotel is very, 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 very minor. But was actually created by wood fiber LNG in response to the community, which was saying, look, we appreciate you coming in, hundreds of workers, you're going to buy stuff, but please don't clog up all the hotel rooms we need for tourists, which I don't know if there are tourists anymore, but we can talk about that. That's a separate issue. Anyways, they suggested this floating hotel. Public consultation period opens. There's a protest on the steps of City Hall. But those first 20 days of the consultation or so, only one negative comment, a few positive ones every day, kind of trickling in. And then with about 3 days left, quote unquote, grassroots, I would submit our AstroTurf group called My Sea to Sky, activates 6,000 followers on social media and managed to generate about 150 negative comments in the final 3 days. So all of a sudden you go from 1 to 150 and in an effort to kind of scuttle this. Does show you that these folks are getting outdone on social media. Our side is, my side, pro-development side, pro-resources side, are getting outdone on social media, and it's a sign that, the silent majority who supports projects like this and the economic development that come with it do need to actually do the due diligence and the work to click the little link and submit a comment and try to buffer off against these other groups.
Well, and this whole episode really illustrates sort of the wider situation that and not just Canada finds itself in, but I think particularly in Canada. You use the phrase silent majority, and I think polls indicate that's accurate. But what has become apparent, and we haven't talked about this much, is that being the majority no longer seems to matter anymore. The word silent is the more important part. Is that the squeakiest wheel has been getting the grease in Canada for a while now. And so the better organized, even if they are a even vanishingly small minority, unfortunately, too many times seems to be getting its way.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. So, not great. Now, I understand you're actually interviewing Teresa Tate Day? Did we talk about that?
Yes. She is literally in the air right now as we're recording from Ottawa, and we are going to be speaking tomorrow morning. I am very interested to hear from her more on just sort of what it's like in Wet'suwet'en territory right now, what sort of the internal tensions are like, and how all this sort of happened in real time from her perspective, and what was her impression of these protesters claiming to speak for her First Nation and screaming down other First Nations leaders and cleaning staff and all this kind of thing. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, and not just screaming down, but actually taking a position contrary to what a referendum among Wet'suwet'en members rendered, right? Like you actually went out and asked the members of the First Nations, what do you actually think of this? They voted in support of it, and still these Utah these Five Guys, as she calls them. Five Guys, by the way, great branding, great hashtag, Five Guys. Also great burgers, excellent burgers. Don't go there if you have a peanut allergy. They have they have peanuts and shells. Do you have Five Guys in Victoria?
They do not.
You are missing out. Next time you're across.
I know. I'm in Vancouver. I used to eat there, but yeah.
Next time you're across. All right. I want to talk about something. I want to talk about NDP land. And NDP land, I noticed on Twitter the BC Liberal MLAs were really going after the Surrey NDP MLAs on hospitals and classrooms and things like that. And, that's not uncommon. But what was uncommon was just how bitter and personal and defensive and attacky the NDP MLAs got in return. So it made me think to myself, these BC Liberals, they've landed a punch here. They've hit a sensitive area. But I want to run through a few promises for you. The NDP aren't doing so great. So we had a housing. They promised 114,000 units of housing. They're sort of fuzzy on the time period, although now most commentators seem to think maybe they meant 10 years. Who knows? I'm not sure BC Housing could actually deliver that, with all due respect to the great people of BC Housing. But the numbers have come back, and almost 3 years into this plan, they've had something like 10% of what they actually need have been built. You watched in the QPs, I go through, I watch that later this week, I go through kind of a question period between Todd Stone and Selena Robinson, where I think they're both reading from the same report but have completely different numbers. But I'm going to give the edge to Todd because he provided page numbers and reference, and Selena didn't. But anyways, they're very short of promises on that, and something like half of what Selena Robinson has announced as far as affordable housing is going doesn't have a single dollar of funding attached to it, hasn't been started. They're never going to make that promise. In Surrey, they promised, Rob Fleming, very famously, portables are going to be gone by the end of this term. There were 275 portables the day that John Horgan took over as premier of the province of British Columbia in Surrey. There's now 350 portables, so they're going the wrong way.
Which is more, I believe.
That is more, which is
and not
checks
none.
Notes more. I didn't. That's a Langley School District taught me that 350 is greater than 275. So that is a big problem. Now they'll probably get a couple schools on stream, I imagine, before the fall of 2021 and get that back down. But if they even get back to 275, it'll be a miracle. But they are definitely going to fall short. Childcare spaces. Laurie Thronis in budget estimates, the critic for childcare, just still an odd portfolio, but whatever for him. But whatever, he came up with this. Looked through the childcare minister's stats, and turns out 10%. They've hit about 10% of the spots that they promised they would open up, and no real plan for how to actually increase the supply. And then the Surrey Hospital, this is where I think the Surrey MLAs, NDP MLAs, were just beside themselves. Surrey Hospital announced, there was like a big podium, they were going to build this hospital, and then the 3-year capital plan came, the largest capital plan in British Columbia history, as John Horgan likes to pat himself on the back for. Not a penny, well, there are no pennies, not a nickel for a Surrey hospital in that budget. So it is at least 3 years away from being funded. These are kind of gaping holes in the NDP promise machine.
They are Achilles' heels, I think. And it sort of shows that I think that at the very least, the NDP's messaging is still very much stuck on, 16 years. 16 years of apparently British Columbia being a barren, post-apocalyptic hellscape by judging by some of the responses.
Buy your toilet paper, people.
But, they're 3 years into a mandate, and you're right. These are their own numbers. And so at a certain point, they are going to have to at least say, there's been some snags. Yeah. And during an election campaign, which, is not that far away now, screaming 16 years is not only going to be inaccurate because these are going to be their numbers and their problems, but also I don't think your average voter cares or is going to see it that way. And you mentioned Surrey, not just because of Surrey Hospital, but I think the polls are indicating that is absolutely a target zone for the opposition. Put it that way.
Yeah.
And one thing we haven't even mentioned is that one of those Surrey NDP MLAs is under a police investigation.
Yes.
So there's a lot going on in Surrey. There always is. It's kind of the epicenter of BC politics, but I think it's going to be even more so next year.
Yeah, look, and when you're short on promises, governments tend to start fudging numbers. And, they double count spaces. Selena Robinson, many of the spaces that she now claims that were built under her watch were actually BC Liberal announcements. It's always hilarious when she congratulates or pats herself on the back for a new project opening, and Todd Stone puts out the 2016 news release of, BC Liberal Housing Minister Rich Coleman announcing it, right? Like, it's pretty funny that's, something, but they'll count that. Wouldn't surprise me if all of a sudden you saw some sort of monkey business with the rental assistance program, and they'll claim that some spaces were created out of that, even though it's money for rent, not actual new units, but okay. But I have no doubt that they're looking at monkeying around somehow. Like, they'll fudge numbers in order to try to get there.
Well, and they're going to have to, because next year's budget, the election budget, is not going to be, the cleanup batter budget. It's not going to be, they can't swoop in with piles of cash, because not only do they not have any now, but we're likely to be in a worse situation next year, if only because of coronavirus and nothing else.
Yeah.
So, it's not like they're going to be coming in next year and just make it rain to make this happen, unless they're willing to embrace a big ol' deficit, which they might have to do anyway.
Yeah. Look, China and Japan's economies are reeling, and we closed trade offices there, so there's that. That's a blow. The effect of oil prices, while not a huge driver in the BC economy, certainly does affect investment in natural gas. That's going to be a big downward trend for the budget. The U.S. downturn, if now it looks like Joe Biden's going to hold off Bernie Sanders, but if there had been a President Sanders, that would have been very bad for corporations that rely on investment income like ICBC, which, by the way, Richard McCandless, no fan of how the BC Liberals ran ICBC, did point out that the NDP have made them very dependent on investment income this past couple of years, and they could be in real, even more financial trouble because investment income's plummeted. Forestry's down, of course. Tourism, the downturn in tourism is going to make the downturn in forestry look like a walk in the park. We're going to come up on the cupboard is bare budget here.
Yeah. I have to imagine the brighter minds in the NDP see the same things that you and I do, and are probably trying to lay the ground, even just politically, for preparing British Columbians for. I just don't see how the budget is balanced next year. It would take, a level of financial wizardry and bullshittery, our first swear word, that I just don't envision. I think that at a certain point they're just going to say, we couldn't help it, it's coronavirus, is what they're going to say.
Yeah.
But I think that we're looking at a deficit next year.
Yeah, and then I think the Liberals can make a compelling case like, hey, shit happens. If we're swearing out with the podcast, shit happens. Yeah. But, that's why the 3 years before that, in the best times in BC economic history, when we're leading the nation in growth, you should have been putting money away, say, in a surplus of $2.5 billion a year like they used to do. So, it's one thing to say, rainy days do come, but with them.
That's why you save for them.
Yeah, they and Trudeau did not save a nickel for them. So that is definitely bad news. Okay, let's talk about coronavirus. Jody Vance has a very, it was a love affair with Dr. Bonnie Henry.
Yes.
So Jody is like a real media person, unlike me. So relies on the information that Bonnie Henry and the BC Centre for Disease Control is putting out. And you got to hand it to Dr. Henry. It seems to be doing a bang-up job so far. But this piece was like, it was basically a letter from British Columbians by Jody saying, you're doing such a great job. We promise to wash our hands and hold up our end.
There was a bit of there was some parental angle in there almost, but it's Jody's point, I think, is that just judging compare us with what happened in Washington State, where they were sort of denied permission to do testing and then just eventually decided to do it anyway, defy orders, and that's how they discovered their first cases there. And we are light years ahead of some places in the world, and so at the very least we can be grateful for that.
Yeah, you know what won't get credit for that? 16 years of BC Liberal rule. Listen, Dix has been doing fine so far. I would just caution everyone, it's still early days. Let's not rush to praise everything until we actually see how this unfolds, because we're still on the curve, Lord only knows, right? But, up till now, everything seems to be going fine. But it's not like Adrian Dix took over in 2017 and rolled up his sleeves and said, pandemic planning, that's what we're going to focus on. No, this has been going on for 2 decades, really since SARS in 2002. preparing the way for this, making sure that we had measured responses, making sure we were running different models, making sure that we knew what was going on. The number one thing that has helped us, I think, in being prepared for this was H1N1, the swine flu and the avian flu, because it gave, we're still a huge agricultural community. It gave government, and by government I don't necessarily mean the elected officials, I mean the experts running, the public servants. It gave them, test cases of what to do and what not to do, and it prepared us for that. So, the NDP are quick to blame everything bad in BC on the 16 years of BC Liberal rule, but at the same time, you got to tip your hat to former health ministers, Terry Lake, Mike DeYoung, was he a health minister?
I believe so.
I believe so. Other health ministers whose names escape me.
Who are in no way diminished by our inability to remember
Hansen,
them. Certainly Terry Lake.
With the health, I was a health minister, I believe. That's terrible.
Yeah.
Isn't that terrible? This is like a footnote now. We forget. Anyways, nonetheless, the system, it wasn't invented overnight. And
no, you're right. It's an institutional success so far. And you're also right that we shouldn't be knighting anyone just yet.
No.
It's still very early days.
It's early days. I do wonder, though, if I need to get a permission slip from Jody Vance if I decide to go to Nashville on this conference, or at least have her send an excuse for me to Dr. Henry, so I don't feel like I'm disappointing her because, I have to travel for work. So nonetheless. Okay. Red hot tip. Here we go.
Yes.
So I believe the documents requested by the Colin Commission from the BC Liberals, the cabinet documents, are due this week. I do believe that Attorney General David Eby, he of the very highly partisan political beast that he is, and seemingly even dictating to the Colin Commission who he wants to hear from, which is completely inappropriate and was rightfully lashed by the entire media establishment because it's not your damn business anymore. You set up the commission, you let them do the work, Mr. AG, keep your nose out of it. However, I do believe that he wants to be the conduit for how those cabinet documents get to the Colin Commission. My sense is that Mike DeYoung would rather just hand them off directly to the Colin Commission. But nonetheless, here's what I know. Mike DeYoung's come out and said publicly not a stitch has been redacted. They're all there. Yep. The documents are there. They've been requested. Not redacting anything. If I were Mike DeYoung, tomorrow morning, not Friday because you don't want to look like you're taking out the garbage. Tomorrow morning, I would have a news conference somewhere. I would have the binders. I would announce that we've handed them over. All the documents have been requested. Not redacted a single thing. They're there for the Colin Commission to look at. And we've also posted them to xyzwebsite.com in order for the public to see too, because you know what? We weren't perfect, but we made the best decisions possible on the best information we had at the time. And if you actually look at the documents, you'll see that. And I would post them publicly. I would put them out there. That gives, that takes all the power out of EB's, EB can't politicize it. EB can't claim that they're redacted. No, they'll be there with no black lines on them. Everyone can look at them. It also puts a little bit of pressure on the NDP because they have been requested their 1996 to 2001 cabinet documents. I would just point out, Maclean, in 16 years of BC Liberal rule, not a single gaming minister or premier was forced to resign because of a lotto scandal or a gaming in disgrace.
Indisputably true.
2 NDP premiers were forced to resign in the 90s. That's why they want those documents from the 90s. So let's just remember that. And I would put the pressure on EB. Say, look, we've opened the kimono. Do not open the kimono. We've opened the kimono, which is my favorite weird saying. And, let's go. Let's take a look. And then Sam Cooper can dig through the documents and do his stories and see what the police were actually recommending. Because it's not like Cabinet makes a decision to disband a unit, for example. It's not like they just came out of it with thin air. There's backgrounders, there's rationales, there's input from, the actual, federal authorities and other people involved. That's what I would do if I were him. I would go full disclosure, put it out there and see what happens.
I think that's good political advice. And I'll say this up front. I don't know what's in those cabinet documents. I've actually never seen a BC kind of cabinet document. I have seen federal cabinet documents, but that was a long time ago. And I used to work in the federal government. Okay. Anyway, so without knowing what's in those cabinet documents, I don't know if it would be possible to release them completely unredacted. And I'm not talking about anything embarrassing for the previous government. I'm talking about confidential information, investment stuff, investors, people's names. I don't know. I'm completely just throwing darts. I wonder if it would be possible to, completely no redactions whatsoever. And if they did have to black out people's names
Yeah.
or something like that, then the EB would still say they're redacted. I agree with you. I think it's good advice. I just, without seeing what's in the documents and
Right.
knowing that cabinet documents can be rather expansive, I wonder if it's possible.
Yeah. Well, I'm just taking DeYoung for his word that he gave to
Yeah.
Von Palmer, which was that. And look, they're not taking.
Oh, he would have given them to
Yeah.
Cullen unredacted.
Yeah.
I'm talking about publicly.
Right. They're not taking. Well, I mean, Colin's going to release these things anyways, right? They're going to go through it. They're never going to. Like, this is a narrow search of cabinet documents. This
Yeah,
isn't,
it's
this
true.
isn't such and such a land deal or such and such a Olympic issue or whatever. It is focused on this, on basically what they decided to do with the money laundering unit and BCLC issues. So if they haven't redacted it, I think they should release it. I think they get ahead of the story. I think they actually put the pressure on the EB, and for once, EB's a little bit on the back foot. But I don't know.
Assuming it is safe to do so to protect third parties,
Yes.
Innocent third parties, I agree with you. I'm not positive that would be the case.
Sure. The more I think about this Collin Commission, and the more I kind of read, who's on the list to speak and some of their submissions, the less I think this is going to be the slam dunk political victory David Eby thinks it is.
Well, I tend to agree. I think it's a more sort of comprehensive problem, and it's not going to be one that he can just. Eby's been pretty transparent. He wants this to be Christy Clark and Rich Coleman did this.
Yeah,
they
handcuffs,
did this. They're
let
the
out
problem.
the door.
They lock her up, and I don't think that's the case.
Yeah,
and
I don't either.
it's just going to be it's going to look like there were some mistakes made, dating back to 1996. But I don't think that there is any government conspiracy, previous government or the government before that. I just don't think that exists.
Yeah.
Hopefully the Cullen Commission will, at the very least, come up with some good advice on how we can solve this going forward.
Yeah, and part of the reason there is no government conspiracy, I don't think, is because in that early days, 0102, the BC Liberals came in and basically divorced, they took enforcement away and put it at arm's length from government, from political government. And the reason they did that was they just seen 2 NDP premiers resign, right? That was pretty clear. So, you're like, okay, well, I just get the sense that it's not as powerful as they think it's going to be. And I was reading some of the criticism of the German report, which gets taken like gospel by some quarters in British Columbia. And there were some interesting holes starting to be poked into the German report, just in opening statements, let alone when you actually start these lawyers, who are well paid, are actually going to start getting into the nitty gritty. People he didn't interview, modeling they used instead of actual facts. That could be interesting too. So there could be some backtracking there. Not to say that there wasn't money laundering. Obviously, there's always, in every civilized economy, there's money laundering going on, and they should absolutely get to the bottom of it and put procedures in place going forward. But I just don't think it's going to be, like you said, or it's not Rich Coleman, Mike DeYoung, and Christy Clark being, frog marched down to the local police station because of anything coming out of the Collin Commission.
Unfortunately, the problem was never that simple, and I don't think that's what we're going to learn happened.
Right. Okay. We talked for recession. Recession is coming. People, be prepared. Okay. Maclean, the last question period of the year. I was all set for the Mike DeYoung evisceration of Scott's Tots, and it certainly worked out fine. The protesting, all that stuff got plenty of play on that question period. But he opened up by talking about in only the way that Mike Farnworth can, where
DeYoung.
Mike DeYoung can, where he just kind of, he's not mad, he's just disappointed.
Yeah.
And he kind of says,
he's good at that.
He kind of goes, but my first question, we'll get to that in a moment. We'll canvass that in a moment. My first question is, Mr. Solicitor General, and my ears went, what? Mr. Solicitor General, is it true that on your payroll you have a staffer who is providing, items and support to the protesters, which even in NDP land would be
not good.
Not good. And let's recall that the question period started with that question about a woman named Stephanie Papik, who is listed on the website for the protesters as bringing stuff in to help them, tasked with certain items, is a paid employee according to the government directory of the Ministry of Public Safety and Solicitor General. So Mike Farnworth took the question on notice, as is his right, and as he probably should have, since, I don't think Farney knows the name of every single person who works in the Solicitor General Ministry. But here we are. It's been 6 days, and never a word, not a whisper.
Nothing. No, we have followed up, to be honest with you, and we just have heard nothing. As far as I can tell, if Stephanie Papik still has moved on, there's no record of that. There is no one else who has taken over a job with that same title, if that means anything. But I mean, if she had been, if she had moved on or given her notice or something like that, that wouldn't necessarily show up in records we have so far.
Yeah,
but yeah, no, they've said nothing, absolutely nothing. Which kind of looks. It would have been a lot easier, I think, for them to say, something the next day or Monday. Yeah, we've looked into this, and unfortunately, it's true. They clearly they want this problem to go away. It's not going to go away. This, I'm sure, will be the first question asked if there isn't information out beforehand in the next question period. But you can't have an employee of the Minister of Public Safety trying to coordinate protests on the legislature and saying they need to protect protesters from the Victoria Police Department, which I gather was one of her posts. It's how would you even describe this? Is it a conflict of interest? Is it just grotesquely inappropriate?
Yeah, it's so weird. And so, every couple of days I tweet it out again, like, anyone heard anything? Today I actually tagged some press gallery reporters. I don't like pestering the press gallery. But, at the same time, I'm like, guys, like, someone must, like, Farney is one of the more accessible MLAs, I've been told. Generally quick with the text. Yeah, generally quick with the text. He, by the way, liked a tweet of mine, not to do with this, but over the weekend. I forget which one it was, but it was a funny tweet, and he liked it, and I appreciate Farney's sense of humor. But, like, Mike, come on, like, let's hear the story here. Tell us what you're going to do about it. But maybe it's like a thorny HR issue. Maybe there's nothing they can do about it.
Well, I suspect that is the case. And I don't think anyone is suggesting, you or anyone else, that Farnworth would have been aware that an employee of his was helping coordinate the protests. I think most people would assume that he would have had no idea. And so, and I can tell you from that, being in the gallery that question period, I mean, this was not something he saw coming. Yeah. He had that look on his face, just He meant it when he got up and said, "I will take this on notice," because I don't think he knew the answer. Yeah. I'm not suggesting he's saying he doesn't know her. I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying I don't think he knew that one of his employees was directing protests. Yeah. Now, your point is very well taken. It has been 6 days, and yet we've heard nothing, which to me looks, at the very least, I won't use the word suspicious. I will use the word interesting.
Yes. Yeah. So, okay, good. I'm glad you guys are still on it. I assumed you were, and I'll just try not to annoy you all with my tweets. But like, Friday we still haven't heard anything. It's been 8 days. Like, Port Coquitlam's not so far away. Like, you can pick up a phone.
It would be an interesting HR issue. I don't know how you resolve that.
Well, the problem is that you have the layer is that it's the Ministry of Public Safety and Solicitor General, which is responsible for policing, and you have this person whose role is supposed to be bridging Indigenous issues into the ministry, saying you can't trust the cops. So if you're the cop, like, how do the cops work with you to build that trust? You've just said you can't trust these guys. I got to keep an eye on them, right? Like, and even John Horgan apologized to Victoria Police because the Victoria Police are put in an awkward situation here. They don't want to be arresting these kids, but at the same time, it's their job.
Yeah. So everything you said is true. I just don't know if this is true. What do you do? I think they're going to bend over backwards. That they're not going to want to fire her. But also keeping her in the same job is tricky. So then what? She has to accept a transfer to a comparable position elsewhere within the wider apparatus of government, but she has to accept it. Yeah. Because this is going to be a willing transfer, because she was appointed by order in council. So it's a thorny issue, and I suspect that is why there's this delay, is they're trying to figure out just what exactly they can do next.
Yeah. Well, an OIC can be revoked.
It's true, but that is the same as being fired, and I don't think that's a move they want to make politically, right? They fired a young Indigenous woman for standing up for, because that's how it'll be spun.
Yeah. No, that's true. Okay, well, I for one welcome any.
We shall see.
I always welcome probes into the NDP's hypocrisy on the whole protest file. These guys would have been right there with these protesters 3 years ago. Most of them would have been, more than happy to link arms, and now they're the bad guys. So it's the old Batman Dark Knight story, right? You live long enough, you become the enemy, or you become the bad guy you despise. Don't live too long because you become the villain. So with that, John Horgan.
With a line from Batman.
John Horgan can be the Joker sometimes. He's got some funny dad jokes.
He does.
It's not really a Riddler character. Not really a Penguin character.
No.
I'm going to have to look up my Batman history and find the appropriate bad guy to compare him to. But
I am way out of my depth, this kind of thing. If my wife will be watching this later and wanting to throw something at me because she loves Batman, be like, what do you mean? How do you not know that this person's the Riddler and this person's Poison Ivy? I'm like, I don't know.
Oh, good job referencing Poison Ivy. All right, there you go. Maclean pretending not to be a geek, but he really is. We will be back next week with another Hot Stove. And God, look, it's BC. God only knows what's going to happen between now and then. So.
True. Something's going to happen between now and when they tape Unspun.
That's right, exactly. And to the mob that watches us every week, we say thank you, and we'll see you next week.
Cheers.